opportunity to address the board?
I would.
Oh, fantastic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carolyn Leavitt. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm here representing D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services, as well as the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center. I'm actually our suicide hotline director. So we get about over 100,000 calls, chats, and texts per year, and that's just mainly based in LA County. So I'm here to support AB 1436. I think it's a great step in the right direction. We do know that training saves lives, and I think that that's really important. I know we talked to some numbers, and I won't go too much into it, but suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people. So people, that are teens and young adults. And 1/3 of people who die from suicide have had previous contact with a mental health provider. 20% have had mental health contact within 1 month of dying by suicide. So we know that we're on the front lines. We're coming in contact with those people. So I think we can make a really big impact. Not only does D.D. Hirsch have a suicide prevention hotline, we also do support groups for clients that have attempted suicide. And I can't tell you how many clients we've tried to link to therapists in the community that have turned those clients away out of fear, stigma, fear of liability. We also have a lot of people in the community that call our crisis line talking about their suicidal thoughts because they're so fearful to talk to their own therapists about it, because they're worried if I just say suicide, and this may have happened to them, I just say suicidal thought, they're going to hospitalize me. Right. So I think really this training targets helping not only the clinicians, also the clients and the patients, and keeping people in the community. So we do take the least restrictive route. Because I agree, the PET team, the hospital, can be traumatizing for people. And just kind of as an aside, I'm LPS designated. I know a lot of people at my agency are. We do psychiatric holds in-house ourselves. I have the ability to write those holds. So that is an option for agencies as well, to kind of not have to wait for it. 1 hour is definitely an underestimate. I would say the PET team is more like 8 hours. And just our crisis line itself, I mean, this is a lot of outreach, but we do know this is it's a problem that continues to increase. 2016, 80,000 calls. Last year, over 100,000. So a jump of over 20,000 just in 1 year. You can imagine the administrative issues that come from that too. So I understand there's, some difficulties in the idea of adding anything, but I do think that 6 hours is doable. And I honestly do not remember getting any suicide prevention training during my MSW program. I really did not know that much about suicide until I started this job. I kind of knew how to assess for it, but I also had a level of fear. We have so many therapists contact our crisis line, not knowing what to do. And our counselors are just paraprofessionals. They've just gone through our training. They may not even have a bachelor's degree, but they have the skills needed to be able to direct that therapist or that psychologist or that doctor on how to help that client. So I think for all those reasons, this is really important. And also, California, we're kind of a forward-thinking state. I think we need to be the leaders in this. We do promote a lot of social causes and a lot of mental health causes. So I think, we need to kind of be the leader in this, and hopefully other states will follow suit. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for looking at this and giving it consideration. My name is Hernandez. I am a volunteer position board of directors chair for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in San Diego County. I'm also part of the Suicide Prevention Council for the county, and recently appointed to the Behavioral Health Advisory Board for the county. I support, this bill. I lost my nephew to suicide 9 years ago. He was only 21 years old, and he was a regular, great, vibrant person who just didn't get the help that he needed when he needed it. I've learned a lot about mental health since then. I have an information technology background, and I've learned that it can be preventable with some training. So I went and sought out, prevention and intervention training. I conduct those to the community. And what I've also found that mental health professionals from all different stripes, they sometimes, when we do role play, they have trouble even saying the word suicide. So, this is a great opportunity to be able to, have a more robust training, maybe get a refresher for some people. Even for folks who are highly trained, maybe they'll get one thing out of some continuing training. So we believe that's valuable. And the other thing, too, is we work so hard in the community reducing the stigma for mental health. And we work so hard telling people it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to reach out when you're in crisis or you're just having the worst day of your life. But if everyone's following our advice, the workforce needs to have some skill. The citizenry, right, they have an expectation that there's some skill or even mastery in the area of suicide. So I'm very pleased that you're considering this, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you guys for introducing this to the bill, committee members. My name is Casey Likeness. I serve on the Orange County Board of Directors for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I am the chair for public policy. Asking for your support and not to be redundant with anything that's already been explained, but introducing a 6-hour program for the countless hours that a professional has to go through, to become a professional therapist, MFT or whatnot, is not asking a lot when you consider the hundreds of hours. And I know that when we stood on the floor in Sacramento 4 years ago when this was introduced, we did listen with an open mind to the opposition. Right, this course doesn't exist, as one of you mentioned. There actually is a nationally recognized 6.5-hour program that was developed by the SPRC, Suicide Prevention Resource Center. So out there in the forms with the email, if you look at page 2, you'll also see, some of these responses from some of the professionals. And one, Robert, I quote, is now that I know how to assess risk rather than predicting whether a client will attempt suicide, I can now focus on what can be done in addressing the risk and going to the next steps of planning a response. This combines an empathic approach with clinical's best practices. So in March, when I was in Sacramento, and I did meet with Assemblymember Quirk Silva for the 65th District, she was trying to get some online virtual programs into schools for an at-risk student. My brother Kevin was 19 years old when he died of suicide 17 years ago, and she was mentioning with Dee Hirsch, the professionals don't have the training to understand how to deal with it. I'm a banker by trade. I've gone through probably over 40 hours of training on how to deal with an at-risk individual because in volunteering for the organization that I do, I've become somewhat of a beacon in my community, right? People don't know how to deal with this. Well, professionals should. And if you look at the percentage of the at-risk individuals that they encounter on a daily basis, whether it be in schools, first-team responders, or whatnot, think of the percentage of the people that are at risk when you're in behavioral health, mental health. You are a professional that's supposed to be dealing with somebody's mental issues or traumatic or tragic situation that they may have gone through, whether it be divorce, loss of job, depression. We know that greater than 60% of Americans at the age of an adult will experience depression at one time in their life. Think of the percentage that mental health professional is dealing with as an at-risk individual. Programs do exist. Introducing a 6.5-hour course will help equip these people in how to deal with it. So I appreciate your time. I just ask for your support on this bill.
Yeah, and you're part of an organization that does the training?
We
Yes.
are, the AFSP is focused on prevention through educational programs, which we developed at a national level.
Okay, so are those trainings approved by the social work organizations, the counseling organizations, APA, AMFT? Because we have requirements, the programs have to meet. The CEUs can't count unless they meet the requirements by the board statutes. And so I'd really strongly encourage you to work with Kim to make sure that you guys meet those standards so that the licensees can take your course, because we can't take just any old course.
The AFSP doesn't have any actual courses that we've created.
Uh-huh.
Some of the training that I went through was developed by a company, Living Works, right? Assist training. That was a 2-day program, and I believe a lot of the mental health professionals that attended that 2-day course that I went to did count 4 hours. Would you guys know is assist approved and it counts towards hours? Yes.
Okay.
So some of the
Yeah.
trainings, you know,
Because if the trainings exist, that's
Sure.
awesome, and especially if they're
Right.
by organizations such as yours, that's even better than some
right.
CEU company just making one up. I just want to make sure that they're through our approved groups. And just a little point I want to make. Yes, 6.5 hours isn't very long, but we already have 2,500 hours of required information, and really 6 more. Everybody keeps coming here every year to add more.
I understand.
So this is important. I don't disagree. We need to do it. And 6 hours and 6 more and 6 more. I mean, it used to be a 36-hour program. Now it's a 48-hour. Then it was a 48-hour program. Now we're doing 60 hours. So it's growing. It's necessary, but
Right.
I don't want to minimize the 6 hours because it is a lot.
It
It
is.
adds
It
up.
is.
It adds
And
up.
I understand.
And it's important, and we should do it.
It's a common occurrence that these mental health professionals face as an at-risk individual. And when we're talking 100,000 phone calls in a year to the D.D. Hirsch, crisis line, what percentage of that is a mental health professional wanting to seek help?
Yes. No,
Right.
I fully agree with you.
So-
I fully agree with you.
I encourage you guys to, read up that the program does exist. I know that was one of the biggest points of objection and opposition 4 years ago when I was speaking on the floor in Sacramento. The programs do exist. There are other programs out there as well. We as an organization, we fundraise to host these within our communities and open the doors for those that actually want to attend and just better, further their knowledge and their experience and professionalism in their career to be equipped on how to handle these situations because it is common. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify something on your question. So the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the Suicide Prevention Resource Center hosts the Best Practices Registry, which is actually on Spark's website. And so this one program, I think that's mentioned in Mr. Ojakian's attachment, the addition, the AMSR training has been vetted as best practices.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Vanderstad. I'm an area director with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I cover San Diego, Orange County, Riverside, and San Bernardino. I think I got them all in there. I have the pleasure of working with amazing volunteers like Casey, who spoke earlier. The work we do in the community, we do a variety of different training programs, and these programs are for mental health professionals, for school personnel, for general community members. They include programs such as Safe Talk, Assist. They range in hours from 3 to 16 hours. But the one thing that we continuously hear is that individuals want more training and they need more training. And it's a need that we as one organization simply cannot fill as best as that we try. But this is one reason why we are asking for your support here today. I myself got involved with AFSP in 2009 because in 2008 I lost my dad to suicide. He was my world, and when I lost him, I learned that I knew so little about suicide, and I also learned that many mental health professionals, including those that I seeked out after his death, knew very little. And it's kind of become, as many of us that are involved in this organization, a passion to not only educate the community, but those who work on the forefront, those who are working with clients. And I will tell you, as a Safe Talk trainer, I've had mental health professionals in my workshops that have actually refused to say the word suicide. They're afraid. It's a scary word. We call it the other S word. And I hope that by supporting this bill that we can change that we can talk about it, because ultimately talk and education will save lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Charley Winters, and I think I'm the last representative here from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I serve the San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, Ventura, and LA County areas, and I sit on the Council for Suicide Prevention in LA County, Ventura, and San Luis Obispo. And there's many mental health professionals on those councils, and those who are highly trained mental health professionals often talk about the lack of training in the industry of mental health professionals. Recently, I trained on one of our programs for high schools called More Than Sad in Simi Valley, 18 counselors on that program. And when I started the training, I asked to see a show of hands of who had received any suicide prevention training. And only a handful of the 18 people in that training had received any training, and many of them said it was on the job. One of the things that we wanted to mention is that our organization partners with the California Department of Education on doing youth mental health first aid training to schools in California, and so far we have trained over 5,000 personnel at the school districts in California. So we're doing the best we can, but there's still so much more to do. We act as a resource in the community to our constituents, and over again, we hear about how it's so difficult to find mental health professionals with the adequate training. Last night in Simi Valley, we did a training, and it was such a discussion among parents about how it's so difficult to find mental health professionals for their children who have been trained in suicide prevention. So thank you for your time, and we ask for your support for this bill.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask one more. Is there any other public comment?
Good afternoon, Ben Caldwell, Ola MFT, California. We've taken a position of oppose unless amended on the bill. We share a vested interest in making sure that California therapists are well versed in assessing and intervening with suicidal patients. We all agree on that. This bill sounds good on an emotional level, but if you step back and ask whether it will actually have an impact, it probably will not. Literally every program that you surveyed is already offering substantial suicide training, with more than 80% offering 6 hours or more in this specific area. So for the overwhelming majority of therapists and programs, as well as for the board, this is a paperwork burden and nothing more. That cost comes with no discernible benefit to the public. As you heard, the 6-hour number comes from essentially thin air. There's no evidence that a 6-hour course will be measurably more effective in training practitioners than the 3 to 5 hours that graduates of those other 18% of programs have already gotten. We would be more than happy to contribute time and energy to efforts in a task force as proposed by the BBS in 2014, and as we offered then, to review the latest research in suicide and to develop a model curriculum appropriate for distribution to MFT graduate programs. We believe this is a more professionally and scientifically sound approach to improving suicide prevention training. We'd rather work to make the training that MFTs receive better than require a completely arbitrary number of hours. 6 hours of bad training, whether it's online or otherwise, would meet the requirements of this bill, and it wouldn't make the professional any more competent or confident in working with suicidal patients. MFTs today actively prevent suicides every single day all over the state. This bill will not change that, nor will it change the reality that no therapist, no matter how much training they have had, no therapist can prevent every suicide. We know this is a difficult vote. We know it's a hard bill to say no to. But if we share an interest in reducing suicide, let's work together on something that actually will have an impact, rather than a feel-good bill that will not. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Hi, my name's Jerry Grossman. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist. I'm here to support AB 1436. In terms of the public benefit of training, it's important that clinicians be trained in assessing and treating suicide, and this will serve the public good. Not all licensees were exposed to this training in their graduate program, and we need to, in fact, raise the level of competency of all people in the profession. And if this leads to reducing the rate of suicide in the state of California, then the public's need is going to be met. In terms of the benefit to licensees, it's going to help increase them working from a standard of care, which so they would have the education, training, and experience to deal with this very critical issue. It could reduce their licensees' liability by saying, I have done this training, and that could be helpful in potential lawsuits. And also, if one person's life was in fact saved in getting this kind of training, then it's worth the 6 hours that people are putting in my opinion. And for those clinicians who've had clients who have taken their own life, it is a devastating experience professionally. And having the modicum of training to deal with this is pretty important. And so other professions have said, we want to address this important societal issue. Psychologists have done this with AB 89. And starting in 2017, with AB 2246, teachers are required to have training in suicide. Now, what happens with those teachers? They are told you need to coordinate with a mental health professional that's at your school. And so ironically, the mental health professional does not have to have the training the teachers have. So I think that this would be an important development, that we are following the lead of other professions in the state of California. The mission of the BBS is to protect and serve Californians by setting, communicating, and enforcing standards for safe and competent mental health practice, and I believe that this bill would align itself with the mission of the BBS. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Kathy Atkins with CAMT. CAMT has not officially taken a position on this bill yet, so I'm not able to speak to that specifically. However, historically, we have opposed bills dealing with continuing education mandated on licensees, somewhat similar to what Leah spelled out about the many, many aspects of psychotherapy and the clinical practice and what areas some clinicians are deficient in, and leading, and contributing to consumer protection. I think what I would just contribute to today is that we do have a concern about all the various aspects that some individual therapists probably aren't knowledgeable or experienced in. Like a few years ago, I believe there was an LGBT continuing education bill. A few years before that, I believe it was elder, I forget what the terminology, but dealt with elders. So like Ben said, I do think this is a very compelling topic. And so if the BBS does vote to support this bill, I hope the reason is because the board feels that the current education and or continuing education for your providers is not sufficient, so that you're not setting precedent of other groups who have just as compelling interests in seeing the provider be educated in the various aspects that they feel are deficient. Thank you.
Anybody else from the public? Okay. Now back to the board for the board discussion. Leah?
Just for the groups or the individuals who came forward, I also want to encourage you to, if you haven't already, maybe you have, deal with KDAC, the addictions profession, because many times the cases where I do know a suicide has happened, at least among my small clinical mental health world, it's with substance abuse most of the time. And these are often people who already have a substance abuse problem, which really increases the risk. Second comment I want to make, I appreciate the two individuals who represent MFT organizations about to make sure it's efficacious and what we're doing isn't just throwing something up because it looks good. And I was just trying to thumb through the bill, and it basically says assessment and intervention. And I think we probably need a little more information. You know how like when we have a course, it kind of lists some of the areas. I think assessment and intervention is rather vague, and maybe working with these organizations to add a sentence or two to the language would be more beneficial for the programs who are maybe not doing a good job, or for the CEUs, because there's a lot of CEU companies, and I think it would be important that they know what they need to include as part of that education. So if they have a best practices, I think we should utilize that somehow, at least in larger chunks and categories, into the bill, or at least into the way in which the board can, I don't know, regulate it.
So Leah, are you suggesting that we further clarify or specify what the course content should be?
Yes.
Beyond assessment and intervention?
Intervention, yeah. I mean,
So-
it's so broad, assessment
Right.
and intervention.
What, could you expand on that, what you think it should include beyond that? Just, here's our, and because if we take the amendments, you know, if there's some amendments that you want, we could take them back. Understand that this bill, its life goes through the end of September, so whether it's moved by that time, and that's, I'm not pressuring, I'm just, the reality of it is we're in the second part of the legislative cycle. So if the intent is to get it through now, then we need to be real specific if we're just trying to provide ideas so that it could be introduced again by the group for the next legislative cycle that would start the beginning of the next 2 years.
Okay.
So it's that, you know, either way, I
Yes.
just kind of want to.
Yes, so some ideas that I have, one is understanding what groups are at higher risk, right? Because there are some groups, elderly, males, adolescents, any minority, any oppressed group. Secondly is to put a cultural piece on it. I kept hearing therapists are afraid to say suicide, and that's disconcerting. But you don't always say suicide to your client because of cultural issues. They say, no, I would never commit suicide. You would say, you know, are you thinking of harming yourself?
Yes.
And then how to do the assessment. For sure, the standard protocol for that we probably all learned. And then the different methods of intervention that include agency practices, like what do many agencies do? Do they call the hospital? Do they call the police? Boundaries around that, like don't drive your client to the hospital. And then, of course, doing the intervention and safety plans in the session for someone who says, I'm not suicidal now, but best practices in terms of, okay, I'll ask you to live for the next 3 days. And if you could live till our next appointment and do multiple appointments a week. So just those are general areas that I know that we teach as a standard.
Okay.
So the other, can I add on to? Yeah. So the other thing is, you know, it's really about, you know, the not just about the population. You know, if we are geared towards the mental health professional, it's also about, you know, certain DSM-5 diagnosis.
Yes.
You know, and in relations to substance abuse and trauma.
Dual diagnosis.
Yes. So those co-occurring disorders and, you know, or even, you know, psychotic disorder, that kind of stuff.
Peter?
I just have a question for Roxanne or Kim. I'm more worrying about the process. Is it essential for the board to take a position now to support AB 1436 in principle? And then we can stipulate in the motion that the board would be working with the sponsor of the bill to make further suggestions. Or on the other hand, I myself is not into too prescriptive. If you pass a bill and you can delegate, to the administrative agencies to develop whatever is in the content of the CME. So I don't think it's technically necessary to include all the details in the bill itself. So I just want to ask either one of you, do you have an answer?
Well, I think what we could do is just, with some of the suggestions, because it's assessment and intervention, and then we could say the course could cover some, dual diagnosis to include but not limited to co-occurring disorders such as substance abuse and mental health
Kim,
issues.
Can I ask, maybe what we can do is say that we set up a best practices on the website,
We could
so
do
that we
that.
don't put the details in the
Right.
law, but that we refer to best practices that might.
We can do
Yeah.
that, yeah,
But I'm-
absolutely.
I guess my pushback on that would be, I'm wondering if we don't sort of have someone specify what some core competencies are for a practitioner to hold in terms of skill set, practices,
It's
and
useless.
understandings, and it's useless. So I think the best practice document probably is helpful, but it should be something that flows from our
Right.
recommendations around we're supporting, if we choose to support this, we're supporting this, and these are some core competencies that we want the trainings to include so that therapists are getting something of substance, because we are talking about protecting and preserving
Right.
and protecting life, and I think that's a critical piece that we should identify.
Ready? So I just want to make sure that I'll come right out and say I'm fully in support. And while I absolutely agree that Ben has some good points that it's probably scratching the surface, if it's opening a dialogue or even bringing it forward in people's minds, I think it's absolutely worth the small amount of, even as the comment was made, even if it saves one life, I believe it's meaningful and I would support it. And while I completely agree with all of the suggestions in terms of how to enhance it, I wouldn't want us to delay our vote on supporting it while we get the language that's going to meet everyone's, all of that's great. And what I would take out also, what I would want people to think about is when we delegate the responsibility to provide training to other entities, we've taken ourselves to some extent out of that role of dictating and being prescriptive and monitoring. And what we've said is we're going to entrust agencies that are competent professional agencies to determine best practice. So I'm not opposed to the best practice paper, white paper, whatever we decide to post, guidelines, core competencies. I just don't want us to do something that delays our vote on the bill.
I mean, to piggyback on that, if you want to go with the bill as it is right now, we can certainly do that. And we could see this evolving much like some of the other prescriptive CE that we had.
Yes.
And it's gotten morphed into the curriculum. And then once that happens, then the CE requirement goes away. And so because I think all the points have been very well made, and there's some things to consider. It seems to me crisis and trauma is the perfect spot to put our efforts in that coursework and enhancing the competencies for CE. But to everybody's point is that, are we willing to wait until that's fully developed? Because that's going to take a couple of years, and then you've got to develop it in the curriculum and then not have a vote on just this initial step. So
where are we at in the legislative cycle?
So the bill, I believe it's been amended into a 2-year bill, so it would have to move in June. So it would move primarily in June through the house that's in now, and then it would have to move again in August through the other house. And so that's kind of where it's at. By the time the board met again, it would be pretty much already with the governor, if not signed by the governor. And one other possibility is an approach, something like telehealth that we could prescribe. We stated in the telehealth regulations, in accordance with industry best practices, because
Right.
those best practices can change over time, and that way the law sort of evolves with the industry.
That's what Peter was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Flexibility is sometimes your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
Madam
flexibility.
Chair, are you ready for a motion?
I am.
I would like to move that the Board of Behavioral Sciences take a position to support AB 1436.
I second that.
Okay, any other discussion?
Yes. Yeah, I'm really torn about this because only putting best practices in is risky, I think.
What would be better verbiage?
I think putting out actual competencies. We do that in other coursework. We do that in other CEUs. We do it in every single course we require. Even if it's a subcommittee that we entrust to work with staff to develop it in the next few weeks online, I don't know. I'm feeling really torn.
And I would echo that, just because there is a right and a wrong way to do a suicide assessment, just like there's a right and a wrong way to provide therapy. And I think if we don't provide a loose structure, some sort of frame, some sort of expectations about what the content of the curriculum should look like, I think we're doing what Betty had mentioned. We're leaving it up to people we may be leaving it up to companies or stakeholders whose primary incentive is financial, and so they may not necessarily do what's best practice. And so,
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
On some of all of these other things where we've implemented for the LGBT and elder abuse and all of these others, and we've come up and said we need so many hours here, and we've had these conversations and implemented policies to include these in the curriculum in the past years. Have we been so explicit in our language within bills to not allow the latitude of our approved CE providers to let them provide the curriculum that is best practices, and then the BBS is in conversation with these individuals as to whether or not, don't we have no latitude with our CEs?
The
providers?
CE, I don't have my law book right in front of me, but there is language in the law book that says it needs to meet, the needs of the profession, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. But part of the reason that we turned everything over to the approval agencies is because they have licensees reviewing the coursework. And they have a rigor there that we did not have with CEUs. And we were comfortable with that at the time, because of the expertise that is provided during that review process. And again, it's always the buyer beware. If the buyer doesn't like the courses, they don't go to the courses, the CE provider loses money. So, when you have approval agencies such as the APA and ASWB national and NBCC and AMFT nationally, and CAMPT is an approval agency. You've got the Psychological Association as an approval agency. Those are pretty rigorous hoops that people need to jump through to even be a provider.
That's what I mean. So
right.
I don't know why I would have reservation turning over them to define what best practices are to allow people to go through our providers. If we're allowing them to go through our CE providers for all of the other things that we're requiring, and we have faith in what you just said, the rigor of these CE providers, I don't understand why this particular thing, we feel, I've not heard any evidence that somehow in this, when it comes to suicide, this is particularly an exception to all of the other things that we have relinquished, because you just argued that they do a better job than we
They
can.
do.
Okay, and they do, because it's their people who are making sure that the standards and the rigors are up to what it is they need to study. So I guess I'm just kind of, I don't understand why this particular issue would not be turned over to
I
their
have-
rigor as well.
I have a
Yes.
response.
Oh, I'm sorry, I understand your concern, but for this particular issue, I think it's more important to move forward. And if we delay it, who knows, what's going to happen. I'm coming from an area with clusters of teen suicides in recent years. I just feel like there's not much benefit for us to delay taking action.
Yes.
And then Roseanne?
So I just wanted to, because you mentioned the regulations, I wanted to let you know exactly what it says about
Thank you.
the course content. So for the regulation, which is 1887.4.0, it says the content of the course shall be based on a methodological, theoretical, research, or practice knowledge base, and number one, demonstrate credibility through the involvement of the broader mental health practices, education, and science communities in studying or applying the findings, procedures, practices, or theoretical concepts, or be related to the ethical, legal, statutory, or regulatory policies, guidelines, and standards that impact each respective practice.
Thank you. I can't remember that off the top of my head.
No. Chair, can I say something?
Yes.
So I'm actually in favor of the bill for some of the reasons that have been brought up. I think as a service provider and providing also as an agency that we protect the public, we need to also weigh the risks of not being too specific, which I totally agree with everything that's been said so far, with the fact that what has been done so far is not working. So as a service provider, that also I serve a particular minority group, LGBT people in the community. I have to tell you, I actually felt really identify a lot with the stories that were brought up to the public, because even though people assume that mental health providers know about suicide prevention, it's hard for us to find, and I'm just 30 miles away from San Diego, that's where my agency serves, find providers that there for fear of liabilities, because go and serve transgender youth, they just don't want to do it. They feel like I'm not competent. I don't have a certification. I mean, I heard everything. And so actually us, even though I have to say at the beginning, we work in collaboration with MHA, MHS to create, because I was also, very critical of a blanket approach about suicide prevention that did not address cultural diversity and the fact that we were going on in our, for instance, transgender community and said, this is what you have to be worried about. This is when the triggers were completely different. We lost kids because of it in the past. But said that, I think this is an emergency. And I don't want to treat it as an emergency because everything we have a lot of things coming our way, but it's definitely a national epidemic. Thank you. And the waves of the risk of having adopt educational programs that are not so specific or could cause an additional workload to our providers. I see that, but also we're here to protect the public. We can't afford a delay on the bill. And we know how politics work, let's be honest here. I mean, everything could be offered to the opposition, which is out there, to work against the bill, anything. I think that the best way to do is to work with our sponsors and see how we can definitely include, as we go by, the safe guidelines, so more competency in the preparation of prevention of suicide prevention. But as a service providers in a community that's not so suburb, we have those disparities every single day. And we try to work as much as we can to provide the gap. If I have a provider that actually now can refer to some education that's a little bit more specific, I think culturally will create a ripple effect. I'm not saying that those 6 hours are going to resolve the problem in the world, but will create a ripple effect of education, understanding the priorities of this intervention, that as a board, I think we should support because of our role of defending the public, the interest of the public. So, so said, that's it. Thank you.
I'd like to make a suggestion, because I think we all agree that this is a really important issue and a topic. Could we view this in supporting the bill moving it forward? Could we just view it as this is the first bite of that apple, And then can we turn around and perhaps put together some kind of committee that we can develop core competencies using data, information from our stakeholders, and then revise the crisis and trauma coursework that's existing in schools to incorporate those competencies. Would that be palatable to the board? Because we're looking at this coming into effect in 3 years, right, Roseanne, 2021? So we could get that, I see this committee, this task force working maybe about a year.
So does that, so I guess in suggesting that, are you saying that Max's suggestion that we work with the sponsors around the language, that's not a feasible
No, I
option
think
at this point?
I think that's a feasible thing. I'm just thinking that, 6 hours, honestly, yes, great number, works great, but in the reality, is it gonna make a big chunk of difference? Probably not. But you are gonna get people who probably didn't pay attention to that type of training or education by requiring and making it a mandate. But I think in doing so, I think we need to circle back and because the comments I heard today is that people don't feel prepared, and we prepare them in school. So that tells me that the coursework may not be as rigorous as we would like it to be or as it should be.
Sure.
So I think we would be taking a dual approach. You're going to require the 6 hours, but then we're going to see how we can better strengthen the coursework.
Sure. But I think, and the reason why Deborah asked a great question, thank you for your point around, you didn't really see the necessity for us to get into the weeds. So I'll share an example. So I am the director of training.
What I'm saying is we have
Right.
handed
Why
over
we don't
all
hand it
those
over.
other
I understand
ones
that. I was
to the
gonna speak to that.
CEs, and why not this
I
one?
understand that. So I was going to just push back on that a little bit because as the director of training where I work, we offer CEUs through the APA. And
Okay.
so it's basically left up to me as the director of training to actually vet someone's training plan to make a determination about are these objectives up to the level of an APA standard.
Right.
So that's one thing, but there's tremendous variance in terms of what that looks like. I don't necessarily have to include cultural components because that's not necessarily a psychological, that's not necessarily at that threshold. I could not include competencies of an actual, that a clinician should embody when they're doing an assessment like this. I could overlook that and just provide a general assessment, intervention, and maintenance training that doesn't really have any sort of, doesn't have the necessary specificity that I would prefer that our clinicians in our system of care have. So I think identifying what those are, even if it's broadly doing it, is helpful as training managers determine who are they going to bring into their system of care to train their staff. Because I think if we don't guide them, then I think my experience and my observation has been that there are some training managers who won't necessarily go the extra step. They will do what's necessary and move on. So I think we should require them to do more because I think this is a critical concern that we're trying to manage as we're looking at health disparities in all communities as it relates to suicide.
Okay, so now my concern is the check and balance with the CEs that are being provided via APA. So what I heard you say was that there could be all of this, we're omitting this and we're not doing this.
So there's variance.
Is there any check and balance with APA that is auditing the CEs no?
Well, no,
Sure.
no,
So
I
let
wouldn't,
me
no,
finish.
no, that's not accurate.
So what happens is that APA
No.
does audit them,
They
but
do.
generally after the training has already been
And
completed.
it's already a full training, and it's not like they're not trying to meet state requirements. So they're not assuming that this person has never had any suicide discussion before. So they may assume that they have a basic understanding. So you need to lay out the criteria.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, I'm fine with the two-step process in terms of let's pass the bill now with a commitment that we're going to do another bill next year that would specify the information that goes in it. However, I don't think you should specify what course it should go into.
Okay.
Our crisis and trauma course is crammed. It has some suicide in it, but we really do it in about 8 different courses, and
Yeah.
we spend a whole lecture in 8 different courses. I just listed some
Right.
of them. So I think that process is fine, but let's not and that wouldn't help the agencies who are running things. So rather, let's just look at the criteria and let each entity decide how to meet
Right,
that.
because that way, and I picked that course only because that came to
It
mind. But I
fits,
know that in the MFT program, it's an integrated program, and social work is the same. And LPCC is specific, and that's where the crisis and trauma comes from. But yeah, okay.
So I think one last comment, and then I'm fine for calling for the vote, but I think we need to not lose track of the fact that we have 100,000 people who are already licensed, whether they were licensed recently or whether they did their coursework 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So I think there is some value to, I mean, the fact that we have 3 different ways to meet this, to me, I mean, while there may be an issue at the training level, at the coursework level, there's also 100,000 folks who are already licensed and probably could benefit from some additional reminders.
Especially depending on when they got a license.
That.
Well, so, okay. So we're going to go ahead and close the discussion and go ahead and call for the vote. And the vote for the motion, as I understand it, is as written. Is that correct? Your motion as
Yes.
written? And your second, Betty, as written?
And is there a way to document that we are committing to the follow-up on
You're going to
the,
direct staff.
well,
Yeah.
so we'll direct
Because
staff.
otherwise
Okay.
we don't want to
So can
do
that
an
be part
amendment.
of the motion?
Right.
Is that part of the motion?
Yeah, I would amend the motion to include the direct staff to develop the
Task-
additional.
Task force? Or what?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
You're right. Thank you.
But not in combination with this bill as an amendment. Okay.
And I'm supporting that.
All right, that's what's on the table. Christina,
Okay.
please.
Renee Launer.
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitliswap.
Yes.
Dr. Peter Chu.
Aye.
Betty Conley.
Yes.
Deborah Brown.
Aye.
Christina Wong.
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew.
Yes.
Jonathan Maddox.
Yes.
Max Disposti.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, and we are going to adjourn for lunch and be back at 1:30. Can we do that? It's an hour and we'll try. What do you want me to do? Wait a minute.
1:45.
1:45?
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
The Board of Behavioral Sciences is coming back to order at 1:47. It is May 11th.
No.
Do you want me to do it again? Okay, it is 1:47, May 11th, and we have now come back to order the Board of Behavioral Sciences. Roseanne, may we have finished 31. Let's move on to Bill 2143.
Yes, okay, and then this is a one that was amended this week, so you should have a supplemental handout on your table in front of you dated May 7th, 2018 as the amendment date. It is E.
So this is one that was a handout?
There was a handout updated
2143.
on the table, yes. Does everybody have it?
Yes.
Okay, so what this bill will do is allow psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners and physicians assistants who hold certain specified license or registrations from this board as well, or from psychology board, and who work in a psychiatric mental health setting to be eligible for the Mental Health Practitioner Education Fund loan repayment grant. So that loan repayment grant fund is something that our licensees, all of them except for LEPs, currently pay into. It's going up on July 1st of this year to $20, and it's due at the time of license fee renewal. That fund goes to the Health Professions Education Foundation under the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, otherwise known as OSHPD, and it funds mental health service provider loan repayment grants for those licensees that provide direct patient care in a publicly funded facility or a mental health professional shortage area to help reimburse their education loans as a licensed mental health provider. And under current law, it defines who's eligible for these programs. It's the licensees who are paying into the program. So that includes this board's marriage and family therapists, clinical counselors, clinical social workers, and also the board's of psychology licensees. The Health Professions Education Foundation gets this money from DCA. We send it over to them when we receive it, and they are required, and them are required to keep these fees separate so that the actual fees paid by each license type go to fund awards for those types of licensed professionals. So if you're an MFT, if MFT money can only go to fund MFT awards, and so on and so forth. And then the foundation has in regulations certain criteria that's specified on how to select these recipients. They have to take into consideration the mental health workforce needs in the area, the cultural and linguistic needs. They look at how likely the person is to stay in working in that shortage area. So things like that. And any recipient of the program must provide services for 24 months for no less than 32 hours a week. So what this bill does is it would extend eligibility to psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners and physician's assistants who work in a psychiatric mental health setting if they are also duly licensed by this board and board of psychology, and they're otherwise eligible for the program. It then goes on to state that qualifying grant recipients who are physician's assistants or psychiatric mental health practitioners would have their grant funded by the fees collected from the corresponding licensed provider group from this board or board of psychology of which they currently are or were formerly a licensee of. And the bill becomes effective this July 1, 2018, if it's signed by them. It's an urgency statute, so the soonest it could, if it were to go through that quickly, it could come effective July 1, 2018. If not, it would be, if that date passed, it would become effective upon signature of the governor after that date. The author states that the intent is to provide incentives for working these areas for psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners and physician's assistants to work in underserved areas, and they hope that this will attract these professionals to those areas and help decrease wait times in those areas for services. There was a bill last year that increased this renewal fee, and the board may wish to discuss the necessity of this bill. However, it contains two kind of contradictory clauses the way that it was amended this week. First, it says that the physician's assistants and nurse practitioners must be duly licensed by this board, which if they were duly licensed by this board, they would already be eligible for the program. So that's a little odd. And then at the end of the bill, it goes on to say, one of the amendments kind of contradicts itself because it says the grant must be funded by the type of license which the recipient is or was formerly a licensee. So it sort of implies that, that you don't need to keep the license or registration from this board current in order to apply for the program. If you were in the past, then you could now. I did have a conversation with the author's office. They indicated in my conversation, which was a couple days before the amendments came out, that they wanted to make sure that it was for dual licensees. They were originally trying to get the original version of this bill, which the Policy and Advocacy Committee considered in April, had the nurse practitioners and the physician's assistants paying into the program as well. That part was removed. They indicated that the reason was a couple of things. There's only a small number of these people that work in mental health settings. And for physician's assistants, they state there's no way of tracking which physician's assistants are working in such a setting. So there's no way to charge only those people working in mental health a $10 or $20 fee. They also indicated that nurse practitioners recently had a significant fee increase. They said that it approximately tripled their fee. Notably, this board may be looking at a fee increase as well, however. According to the Assembly Health Committee's analysis dated late April, they stated that just charging those who are working in a mental health setting of these licensees will not generate enough revenue to provide a meaningful increase in grant funds. So there's a couple of factors that they considered when looking at this. I mentioned that the Policy and Advocacy Committee had, on a previous version of this bill, recommended a support position. In that version, the nurse practitioners and physician's assistants were paying into the program. That version also, at the time, included the board's licensed educational psychologists in this loan grant program. They were both paying in the fee and they were going to be eligible for the program. They were removed in a subsequent amendment, with the author noting that the Assembly Health Committee requested they be removed because they generally practice in school settings. So,
Certainly not in psychiatric mental health settings. I mean, that would be, I mean, there's probably a couple that do, but it would be a low frequency.
I know that CAS's been talking with them. They had been in support of inclusion, and they have written a letter to ask to be included again.
To be added back in?
Yes. I don't know if that's going to happen. I was a little surprised it wasn't in the amendment this week, because I was told that upon them writing the letter that they would consider including them again. So not sure what's going on with that. And so a little side research that I did, and then CASP actually wrote a letter arguing that they are in some settings that are that are outside of school areas, and they would encourage more to do so. And then a couple of other side notes. DCA collects the money from these programs, and let's see. In terms of the awards that get collected, we looked at a couple of fiscal years to see how much money we sent over to OSHPD for these awards. In 2016, it was about $250,000 was collected from our licensees, both MFTs and LCSWs. And in 2017, it was about $223,000. It's going to vary a little from year to year depending on how many people are renewing. And then from OSHPD, I learned that the maximum amount of the award for the program is $15,000. However, it can be less. They decide that when awarding the grants. So just a little bit of outside pieces of information for you. But with that, I'll open it up for discussion.
Christine?
So I think the intent of the bill is good. I mean, I think we all want to get service providers into underserved areas. But I think this bill is problematic for several reasons at this point. The first being that the way it's written now, I don't think it's not necessary to have this bill if they have to also be licensed on our board. So, I mean, the discussion could stop right there. There's some other issues, but I'll just stop there because I think that's enough.
I think the intent might be that they want to ensure that if somebody's like an MFT, but they're also a nurse practitioner and they're working in the setting, that doesn't disqualify them. But they're required to send in an application that explains, their background and recommendations and the environment they're working in. The setting, it just has to be, it doesn't specify that you have to be working in a specific setting other than a rural mental health area, and it has to meet some criteria. So it shouldn't really matter in terms of the granting of the award. As long as you have one of our license types, you should be eligible even if you are also a nurse practitioner.
Correct.
Do we know if maybe the intention of this bill is to ensure that they are allowed to put the money against their nurse practitioner loans versus maybe their MFT loans? Because I'm wondering if they can only, because the language isn't clear, they may only be able to put this money toward an MFT loan package versus someone who actually got their nurse practitioner and has loans on that side also.
I think that might be what they're trying to get to, although I'm not sure that when I talk to them that they're exactly clear on what they're trying to do. Maybe down the chain a little bit, there's some more of a, I think this is still an evolving work in progress.
Okay. And I was just thinking, that might be helpful to understand, because then that would may clarify why this legislation is potentially moving forward, if that's in fact the case.
Two questions. One is, I think physician's assistants can prescribe if they're under the supervision of a doctor. Yeah, I agree with Christine in that it's a little bit too messy for us to make a decision on it right now. I think they need to get clearer about what they want to do. But, the initial description of what they intended to do with just those two professions, and they pay into theirs and their money goes to those people, if they just kept it at that, totally in support of it. But this weirdness with dually licensed, I just don't feel comfortable taking a position on this exact bill. But the philosophy of it, I would want to if they fixed it.
Any other discussion? Christine?
I would go a step further than that. I would recommend oppose. Simply because
okay. Because
it's so messy. I think there's got to be a better way to accomplish this goal. I don't think there's just too many issues with this bill. I mean, why would MFTs pay for a nurse? I mean, even to get, yes, we need to get service providers into underserved areas for sure, but there's got to be a better way than this.
Is there any comments from the public in regard to this bill?
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. We have not taken a formal position on the bill for the reasons that you are discussing. It seems to still be a work in progress. We do have some of those same concerns about who is collecting from these funds versus paying into them, and we expect that there will be further amendments to the bill.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I thought I saw someone else. Up to other people's.
Kathy Atkins with CAMPT. We haven't taken an official position, but like has been said, it does seem that clarity has not come to this bill. I've had conversations with their lobbyist, and the impression I got was the intent might be different, but it doesn't seem to be coming out on paper, so I'm not sure if we're unclear about what the intent is. So we are concerned about this for the reasons already stated. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
can
you.
I say something then?
Okay.
Rebecca
Yes.
Gonzalez, NASW, we would concur. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
So if the intent is unclear and they're getting different messages from the author, maybe we shouldn't do anything until we're clear.
And so if someone wants to, one more person, please, and two more? I can't see. So.
Hi, my name is Chris Jones. I sit on the board of directors for the California Association of School Psychologists. I'm the LEP specialist. We would like to be included in the bill. It was one of the things that we've been talking about with our board as a way of increasing the practices of LEPs. The confusion is that LEPs don't do a lot of work outside of schools. That's not true. It is becoming a growing profession. LEPs practice their licenses to practice privately, and we feel that this would be a way to incentivize more LEPs to move into underserved areas, especially since, that with regards to how the funding would be done, if we're putting our own money into our own pool, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me as to why we would not be included with the other BBS licensees. I know that I've sat on the board now for 3 full years, and we're watching an increase of people utilizing the LEP. I personally have been completely in private practice for 10 years. I haven't been a school psychologist in a building for a decade. I have no intention of going back unless I need to. But from working with other LEPs through the state, it seems to me that the push is for people to start utilizing their license more. I think this would be a great opportunity for us to be able to say, hey, we're working with the other BBS licensees to become, to add on to the ability to utilize your license in different areas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jonathan?
I have a question just in terms of a point of a clarification. I know one of the conversations we've had back in my system is that some of these loan repayment programs are sunsetting, and so I don't know if this is if they're connected at all. So I'm trying to figure out, is there any connection between the workforce programs that are sunsetting and this?
No, this is not a program that's sunsetting. This is just something they're trying to do to bring these license types in.
Just a point of clarification, so if we take a position of oppose with a statement of, it's not clear what the intent is, and we'd like to include LEPs, how does that look as opposed to not taking a position or a support if amended?
I can speak to that. One thing that you could possibly do, because the language is a little, I think that the language of allowing somebody with our license type that's expired and using funds from our professions is concerning. So you could do an oppose unless amended and request that a clear funding source aside from our board's license types be used for the NPs and the PAs. And then you could also include LEPs, ask to include LEPs. What that would do is if they made those amendments, your position would switch to neutral. If they did not make those amendments, it would be an oppose.
Yeah, I'd be comfortable with that. And I'd also want to add the piece around the dual licensure issue. That
You'd wanna-
that it said something that they have to have both the
They have to have both.
Yeah, so to remove
the
that.
dual licensure piece?
Yes.
So they don't pay double fees?
So, yeah, I mean, they should be, if they're a PA or the other kind of nurse, that license is adequate. They don't need a second license, yeah. It says in this, make sure I've got the right one, on, where's the list again? On where it says they,
It's the first page.
third
I
page.
think are you saying that if there's going to be another funding source, it shouldn't matter that we get a license right? To remove that about the licensure since you're not going to be funded?
Right, well, I thought that they had to be dually licensed.
Right, because the funding was going to come from our licensees.
Right.
It does, yeah, they do have to be dually licensed.
So those, to me, those are two issues.
It says
One
in
is the
one
dual
place,
license.
Dual license, and then in another place, it says that the dual licensure can be expired.
Right, so I want to say, get rid of anything doing with dual license,
Yeah.
and then the funding should come from who pays in gets to take out. MFTs get their money, LPCs get their money.
So back to your suggestion about a clear funding source.
So yeah, what I have
Oppose if
is,
amended.
would be oppose unless amended to, the amendments would be a clear funding source for NPs and PAs separate from board license funds, including LEPs, and removing the dual licensure piece.
Is there anything else that we're missing?
I think that pretty much covers it, unless somebody else had something I didn't bring up.
I'd like to make a motion to do what you just said. And
Do I need to
recommend
read
that-
it again? Or are we all clear on that?
The motion would be opposed unless the amendments are to add LEPs, remove the dual license requirement, and establish a clear funding source for the nurse practitioners and physicians assistants.
That's separate from board
Outside.
licenses.
outside of,
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, any more discussion? Okay, we call for the vote, please.
Renee Loner,
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whittlesbach,
Yes.
Dr. Peter Chu,
Aye.
Betty Conley,
Yes.
Deborah Brown,
Aye.
Christina Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew,
yes.
Jonathan Maddox,
Yes.
Max Disposti.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Roseanne, Assembly Bill 2296.
Okay, this bill is sponsored by the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors, or CALPIC, and it has to do with adding licensed professional clinical counselors and licensed clinical social workers to areas of California law where other comparable licensed mental health professionals are included. So this is mainly a cleanup component. It also makes some other changes to LPC education requirements regarding core content areas of study. So there are several areas of law where LPCCs, because they are a newer license type, there are several areas of law outside of the Business and Professions Code where they haven't been included. And slowly over time, after the license was established, CalPIC has been trying to find those and kind of clean that up and include them. And so this bill would do that. And there's also a couple of places where they noticed that LCSWs weren't included, so they're adding them there as well. One of the main main areas is adding LPCCs to list of professionals who can be a child custody evaluator. If the LPCC has satisfied the requirements to treat couples and families as required under the board statute. So just a lot of cleanup in those cases. A couple of other things it does, it removes the half-quarter unit requirement for the LPCC core content areas. Currently, LPCC applicants have to have 3 semester units or 4.5 quarter units of coursework in each core content area. Under this proposal, they would need 3 semester units or 4 quarter units in each core content area. No half units. And then for in-state applicants only, it pushes back the requirement that the applicant must not be deficient in assessment or diagnosis in core content areas until August 31st, 2020. So like I said, this is primarily a cleanup measure. In terms of the core content area, the 3 semester unit and 4.5 quarter units, generally under kind of standard practice, 1 academic semester unit is equal to 1.5 quarter units, which is how we got the 4.5 quarter unit equivalency. However, it's become kind of an issue because it's rare for degree programs, especially out of state, that are not catering to California licensure, to offer courses in half unit increments. So it's can be an issue because only a certain number of core content areas can be remediated. So if an applicant comes in and they're missing 0.5 core content areas in all of the categories, then they all of a sudden don't qualify for licensure because they don't meet the ability to satisfy the deficiencies. And so staff did a little bit of a research about the core content areas in several other states, and we found some data that's presented in your packet. And basically there's the handful of other states that we surveyed. A lot of them do accept 3 semester or 4 quarter credit hour courses for their core content areas. They still have to have the required total number of degrees. It's just not the 0.5 units that have gone away in those areas. And then there's the assessment and diagnosis piece that we discussed at the last board meeting, where there is some in-state schools that didn't feel like they had adequate time to prepare before assessment and diagnosis could not be remediated. And so the board at the last meeting discussed and agreed to allow that to be extended out, how long we would count that. And CalPIC was offered to include that in their bill since the board didn't really have a vehicle at the time for it. So that piece is in here as well. At the April meeting, the Policy and Advocacy Committee recommended taking a support position on this bill. The bill was amended, a minor amendment was made afterwards per AAMFT's request regarding the child custody evaluator piece, that just if LPCCs were going to do it, that they meet the board's required couples and family component. So that was added in recently. And with that, I'll turn it over to the board.
Okay. Leah?
It's always me. Just a quick question for the P&A committee. I don't do child custody evaluations. I'm very not knowledgeable. But what I do know is that the LPCCs have a scope restriction with regard to using more than 3 instruments for the purpose of assessment. Is that necessary to do a child custody evaluation to use 3 or 4 instruments? Because if it's not, then I'm like golden on this whole thing. I just want to make sure that we're not setting up some LPCCs to practice outside of their scope of practice because of the nuance of that law.
I think that's a new thing that is addition to
was
what
after.
the P&A committee. We did not talk about the LPCC, requiring the LPCC to, for the child custody evaluator to get the, that's a couple counseling class. So that's a new thing.
That is new. That was
Yeah.
an amendment after P&A met.
So
But that's not what I'm asking. We have a scope restriction that we can't use more than 3 instruments for the purpose of just assessing.
But I think,
But I mean, if a
Yeah.
child custody evaluator doesn't use 5 instruments,
I don't think
I'm
that
fine
they
with
do,
it.
quite honestly, Leah, and primarily because the approach is more investigative.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're assessing to diagnose a family member. The process is really just gathering information and interviewing.
Great.
So
I just didn't want to set up people
I don't either.
to be on that line and then for CPA to come after us.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, do you have an answer for us?
Yeah, I can speak specifically to that. This is one of those things where it would be sort of nice if every so often we could just like video conference Ian Russ in here.
Yes.
But I know from conversations with him, he's an MFT who does child custody evaluation that involves testing. And so hang with me, this is kind of a pretzel, but I'm going to answer your question. So we have the ethical requirement that if you're going to participate in custody evaluation, that's an evaluative role, that is different from a counseling role, right? We also have the requirement from the, 84 AG opinion, that if we're going to use psychometric instruments with clients, it has to be in a counseling role. The two of those together would seem to suggest that an MFT couldn't use assessment instruments at all as part of a custody evaluation process. What Ian does is he farms out the administration of those evaluations. He just contracts with another provider to do those, and then the findings from those can still become part of his report. That's my understanding anyway.
The school psychologists.
Thank you, Ben. Another? Would you like to comment? Oh, okay.
I'm in support of this bill. I've heard discussions around about all these bits and pieces and reading it carefully. They all make sense. We've done our due diligence. We're still protecting the public.
Okay. Any other comments? Any other comments from the public? Here he comes.
Yes, I had a comment, but not on that issue that you were asking about. GV Airs with CalPIC. We're the sponsors of the bill. We appreciate working with you on this. We would appreciate your support on this. Roseanne, thank you so much for working to help to narrow in some of the language on this, and done an excellent job. Appreciate the other professions for the way they've weighed in and the way we've honed this as well. If anybody has anything else that needs to be added in this where the LPCCs need to be ollie and free, please. Please, but we would ask for your support.
Can you take away that scope restriction? I'm just kidding.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is Kathy Atkins on behalf of CAMT, and we're in support of this piece of legislation.
Thank you.
It's a love fest. Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter, in support of this bill.
Thank you.
Ben Caldwell, AMFT, California. We're also in support of the bill. We had initially been support if amended, and they were kind enough to take our amendment. So GV and CalPIC, thank you. We're in support of the bill.
Thank you.
May
Christine,
I?
did you have a comment?
I just said, are you
Oh,
ready?
I'm sorry. Is there anyone else in the audience? Okay. Back to the board. Christine?
Ready for a motion?
I am.
Move to support.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion. Did you get the two? Okay, thank you. A motion and a second. Any discussion further? All right, call for the vote, please.
Renee Launer,
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach,
Yes.
Dr. Peter Chu,
Aye.
Betty Conley,
Yes.
Deborah Brown,
Aye.
Christina Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew,
Yes.
Jonathan Maddox,
Yes.
Max Disposti.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next one, we have Assembly Bill 2943.
All right. So 2943 is the subject is unlawful business practices and sexual orientation change efforts. It's got a few sponsors: Equality California, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and the Trevor Project. And this bill would make advertising, offering to engage in, or engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual an unfair or deceptive act under the Consumer Legal Remedies Act. And it would allow harmed consumers to bring legal action against violators for damages. So this bill actually is written into the civil code. Usually we're used to working in the business and professions code. So it's in the civil code, there's something called the Consumer Legal Remedies Act. And its purpose is to protect consumers against unfair and deceptive business practices and to provide efficient and economical procedures to secure this protection. And it specifies that there are certain methods of competition that are unfair or deceptive acts or practices, and if undertaken by a person in a transaction that results in the sale of goods or services to a consumer, they are unlawful. And then the law goes on to provide that a consumer who suffers damages as a result of this can bring action against the person for actual damages, restitution of property, punitive damages, or anything else that the court agrees is acceptable. So that's in the civil code, and then in our business and professions code, we have a law that was put into place a couple of years ago that prohibits a mental health provider from engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with a patient under 18. And it makes doing so unprofessional conduct, and the licensee would be subject to disciplinary action for doing so. And then the law also provides, which I've included in your packet, a very specific definition of sexual orientation change efforts. And that definition was very carefully negotiated at the time that SB 1172 ran in, it was 2012, that established the ban on sexual orientation change efforts with minors. That definition was very specifically developed with the board and stakeholders and the author's office at the time to ensure that we got it just the way that everybody agreed to it. So it's a very specific definition. In this case, the author of this bill cites studies, including one by the American Psychological Association that's shown in Attachment A, that has issued findings that sexual orientation change efforts can pose critical health risks. The bill defines sexual orientation efforts for purposes of the Consumer Legal Remedies Act, and the definition is very similar to the definition that the board and stakeholders established with SB 1172 a few years back. The only difference is that the proposed language does not specify that the sexual orientation change effort has to be done by a mental health professional, so it leaves out that specific piece. And then the bill provides that advertising offering to engage in or engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual in a transaction that is intended to result in a sale or lease of goods or services is unlawful and unfair deceptive act. The author's office notes that conversion therapy is a set of dangerous and discredited practices, and that since the passage of California's SB 1172 in 2012, banning conversion therapy for minors, 9 other states, the District of Columbia, and 32 local municipalities have also banned the therapy for minors. So one thing that I had some questions about when I was analyzing this bill is that it bans sexual orientation change efforts with patients of all ages via the civil code by making it unlawful, but it does not add provisions making it unprofessional conduct in the business and professions code. And so I had kind of a question because I knew there was probably a legal reason that they were doing that, but I wasn't sure what it is. And so I talked to the author's office, and they explained that the reason that they did not choose to put it in the business and professions code is they expect some legal challenges to this, just like there was with 1172 a few years back, and they did not want it to be located. They did not want the sexual orientation change efforts with minors that's in BNP code to be brought into that, any potential litigation there. So that was their reasoning for putting it in the civil code. So originally I was going to say, it would probably be easier if we had it in our unprofessional conduct sections, but I think that explanation makes some sense there. So if the bill passes, the board still may be able to take disciplinary action for unprofessional conduct because we have certain more general clauses in our unprofessional conduct law. We have gross negligence is listed as unprofessional conduct, or intentionally or recklessly causing physical or emotional harm to a client is also considered unprofessional conduct. So there's some other avenues there that are available. So at its April 12th, 2018 meeting, the Policy and Advocacy Committee recommended a support position on the bill.
Christine, Leah, Jonathan. And Max. Did you want in on that? No, not yet. Did you
Oh,
want
no,
in on
I thought
after
it said
Max?
Chris. Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay.
Oh, it's Christine.
Christine. I'll put in after Max.
Oh, fine, sorry. Okay, so I speak in favor of this bill as one of a few of us who were here when SB 1172 was challenged and we were all sued. We worked really hard on that, and it was a very important bill, and I think that we should extend that protection to everyone. So yes, I speak in favor.
Okay.
I echo that. It is way overdue. The amount of damage that I see when people go through this, someone trying to change their orientation, is pretty dangerous. It really increases suicidal rates, for example. And it doesn't preclude someone from getting help if they have a religious issue from their religious institution, as long as it's not in the purview of a mental health licensed or a registrant in the mental health profession. So it gives people the freedom to do what they need to do within their religious community, but as a psychotherapy ethical code, we embrace who people are rather than what we want them to be.
So I have a question. So my question would be, who can file a grievance against a practitioner, let's say, who actually provides this level of service? And the reason why I ask is, like in the area of when a therapist has sex with a client, no one else can actually report them to the board except for the actual client. And then at that point, the board will actually take action against them. There's clarity there. So I'm wondering, in this circumstance, who can actually file a grievance or an action with the board against a practitioner who does that?
A client.
It has to be the client.
Has to be the client.
Okay, so, okay.
It's the same with all the complaints.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then I guess my other follow-up question is, and I guess this is a question related to communities of faith who also have practitioners who are licensed by our board. My question is, so what is the recourse of a practitioner who's approached by a client who has maybe converted to a particular religious faith or has changed their thoughts about the way they'd like to live their lives, and they request, I want you to support me to move back in a different direction? Like, what recourse does a practitioner have when a consumer presents, this is the service I want?
They can't be providing, the practitioner should not be providing it to a minor, and that's law.
No, that's clear.
That's very clear.
I'm talking about adults.
So if you're an adult,
Not for pay.
Not for pay, right.
So they could actually come see like an MFT or an LCSW, and as long as they weren't paying for the service, then.
The problem,
it's kind of a gray area.
And the reason why I'm asking is there is pushback from communities of faith who serve constituents who actually want to line their lifestyles up with the faith that they now hold. And so this bill seems to handcuff someone's capacity to be able to do that I'm not finished. Of their own free will as an adult. So I'm just wondering, sort of, what does that look like
but
for
our
someone?
ethical codes are clear.
Yeah. So I think we're getting into practice, how it works. But generally speaking, the only way that we move forward on anything, on a complaint, is if we get the complaint from the client, because that's where the relationship is. It's the practitioner and the client. So if the adult is approaching a practitioner in sort of a religious setting and they want that treatment, and the setting provides it, if they're not going to complain about it, we don't know about it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I've got to be told. And even if an outsider tells me I can receive the information, but in order to move forward with the investigation, I need the release from the client. So
But they still should be.
They still should not be taking pay for it, right?
So just so I'm clear, so a client could engage in a relationship with a licensed practitioner, engage in sort of therapeutic activities that help them align their sort of desires with their religious faith. And what I'm understanding is, as long as they don't take pay for it, there isn't an issue on one hand because they're not being paid. And then two, if they are being paid, then if they don't file a grievance because they don't feel like this is doing harm to them, then there is no concern.
Nobody would know, but they still.
There's no concern from that consumer, and so there's nothing that can be done about it. That's the question.
If there's not a statute of limitations, because they'll complain 10 years from now.
They
not
may
today.
complain. They may complain. That's a broad assumption. They may.
The professional that does it should be aware that there is a risk. It is breaking
It's a
the law.
risk.
So
Sure, but I think what we have to acknowledge too is there's always been a dynamic tension between communities of faith and their rights to practice and do the things that they want, and sometimes choosing to do that and being willing to suffer the consequences. So that's why I'm asking, because there's always going to be that dynamic tension, and we need to be aware as a board that exists, and that communities of faith have the right to engage in certain activities that align with their faith, as long as they are not
Okay.
imposing it on people and people are volunteering for services.
Okay, advice from council is we have veered off of the bill. So do you have a comment about the bill?
Me?
Max, yes.
No, I
yes.
thought-
So actually,
Max is first and then
Oh.
you.
I would like to address a couple of things. Well, because so can I actually address what Jonathan was actually referring to, because it's not actually off topic.
That's
if
up to
it's okay.
Savina.
Okay. Well, I think sometimes the issue is with this also not understanding the consequences, because we apply scientific methodologies in regards to cause and effects. So it's like without any stretch of interpretation, someone goes to a therapist, they ask them to do intervention about not being who they want to be, perhaps their own race, says I want to change my race, and now we allow because of religious faith and based, it goes against our research that we know how the consequences of reparative therapy has on anyone, no matter what their beliefs are. So it's kind of like allowing folks to go against their scientific research that the American Psychological Association, Psychiatric Association now have well defined of the risks on individual or the actions of therapists that have been doing that for many years. So the reason why I believe also as a provider, once again, this problem is more common than we believe it is, because actually we have, me as a provider, we serve individuals that have been subject to reparative therapy even after, just because they are 18 and 19, they graduate from foster care, they're completely disoriented. There is a religious intervention, and they bring them to the therapist, and the consequences are devastating. So I'm really happy to see that now we're extending our research not only to the minors, but to any general individual, because we know how devastating the consequences of reparative therapies are, to a point that there are actually religious organizations, without going off topic, they're actually escorting people outside the state to do intervention on mental health from licensee. So there is a lot of that actually has been, and I think your question is very valid, because a lot of people are questioning that right away. So what is my right to practice based on my faith and religion? It's based on scientific research that we know, that if you're bipolar, you're not going to tell people you don't need medication, because then you are violating the practice of codes. As a psychiatrist knows that you need medication if you want to survive as a bipolar diagnosed individual. So this is not different than anything else. We had the research that now is applicable. We can be concerned about folks that have other idea, have the right to have it, but if they are licensed under the state of California, the Board of Behavioral Science, they need to apply to what we know in regards to a scientific approach. This is still devastating, even though this is very important to me. Obviously, I support it for a variety of reasons as a provider, as an individual, but it's still not resolving all the issues. For instance, gender identity is not even included in the conversation for the same reasons that Roseanne was addressing before. It's because it's very controversial. There is a lot of attempted there are a lot of therapists that even without knowing they do reparative therapy on transgender individual by applying their own methodology, like don't do it now, wait, please your parents, find your job. There's a lot of that. So I think it has to do with the education, the lack of sometimes that we have in regards to not understanding the consequences. And I'm not saying that I was referred to intervention by any means, but to understanding the consequences of leaving out a whole population that's been subject to reparative therapy. It still is. We have actually, sorry if I finish with that, there is out of the 40% LGBT homeless youth that self-identify as LGBT in California, a majority of them struggle with mental health issues, and a good percentage of them have been subject to reparative therapy. So we'll see that every day. And just to finish, as a provider, I have families that come to our LGBT center thinking that that's what we do.
Oh, wow.
So they actually bring kids to us and tell us, I don't want my kid to be trans or gay. Can you do something with them? You have a therapist. And that's the level of ignorance and disconnected there is in the community. They're bringing kids to us because they think we do that kind of work. I end with that. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. And so Christina, do you have a comment about the legislation?
Yes. So I just want to, I want to actually, at the beginning, say what Christine said. I think it's been a history that, we've taken it, to a very highest level of the legislation challenge. So I think the author's office is very, very smart to put it in the civil code, instead of the business and professional codes. So, not only that it expands to all the profession, but be able to, to help with all ages. So that's one point I want to make. The second thing is I understand, Jonathan, where you're coming from. From our board, I think, we need to really look at, what is the best practice for the mental health professional, and how do we protect the public? And so, there might be, personal conflict about, where to stand. And yet, I think, if the scientific research methods has already proven that sexual orientation change efforts is harmful to the clients, it's almost like sitting on the board. There's no reason why we should, not support that. So, and historically, when we look at the lawsuit, there's many pushback, and you're right, it comes from the, the religious organization. And yet I think, it is important that when we look at, the public, that whether this, this is really bringing benefits to the public, this sexual orientation change effort, obviously not. So I think, to me, I'm definitely in favor for that.
So I think I'd like to have I know you're trying to quickly move past it, but we are having
No, I'm getting advice from council that we are veering way off of what our task is, which is to support or have any questions of Roseanne on the specific legislation and any.
What we're talking about is relevant.
But we are talking about that.
I'm only going on advice from
So
our council.
should we offer her an opportunity
Okay.
to explain how we are? Because I was under the impression this was an open discussion, so maybe she can bring clarity to where and just so we stay in the
I
vein.
can't predict what you're going to say, but I was just
What have you heard
trying
that
to.
actually moves it?
I'm
moved it
just
away?
trying to veer us back onto what the actual bill is going to
I
do, not
understand.
like a religious discussion or similar
Right.
things like that. I just need to.
But I don't
concentrate
know
on the
how we
bill.
can have this conversation without bringing in certain sort of communities who actually engage in activities that are relevant to what we're talking about. And we know that for the most part, a lot of this are religious communities that actually say, okay, for example, you've now been born, a person says, I've been born again, I was living a particular lifestyle, I don't want to do that anymore, I need to go get some help. And then people walk into therapist offices and actually say, can you help me walk back in the other direction to align my lifestyle with my new faiths? And so that's why I'm asking these questions, to figure out if a practitioner says, okay, I'm willing, in this example, a Christian therapist says, I'm willing to help you do that. You've come into my office and presented asking me for help. What are the potential consequences for someone who does it? And I think that's a viable part of this conversation.
And that's what Rosanna answered already, I believe, about.
Yes, under this bill, if they're a board licensee, well, it doesn't even matter if they're a licensee or not. If they're doing the service for a fee, then it would be considered a violation of the Consumer Legal Remedies Act. So they would be subject to legal action.
Sure. So I guess to clarify that, so would that be a fee from the consumer or a fee from anyone? I'm just trying to figure out,
It
what does
says,
it say?
by the law states, by a person in a transaction that results in the sale of goods or services to a consumer.
So it's whoever paid the fee for that
So like if
service.
they paid it, if their church says, we're paying it, a broader organization says, we're paying for it, the practitioner cannot receive a fee for that sort of
It means that
service.
right, and it means that the individual receiving the service could have some legal recourse.
Could say that last part again?
The individual receiving the service and then all of a sudden is unhappy has some legal recourse.
Gotcha. That's all. I think Renee had her hand up.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the public. Is there anybody who would like to speak to this bill?
Janley Wong, NASW, going before Ben Caldwell.
You had to get a head start there.
Yeah, if I understand the bill correctly, it really talks about somebody practicing their profession. And it's on the civil code side, so it's not really directly related to the issues in the B&P code. However, if somebody's profession is regulated by the B&P code, in particular by scopes of practice, then I think that does apply And so if somebody has a business and their profession is regulated by their scope of practice in the B&B code, then that means that person's subject to this legislation if passed.
Thank you.
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. The questions that you all are asking are, I think, informative and relevant, and we are in support of the bill.
Thank you. Anyone else? Can't see. Nope. Okay. Too short. Christine? Okay, so no other comments from the public? Okay, I'll cut that one off, and now back to the board.
I would like to make a motion.
And I would like, oh, what's your motion?
The motion is to support the bill as presented.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, call for the vote, please.
Renee Launer.
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitliswalk.
Yes.
Dr. Peter Chu.
Aye.
Betty Conley.
Yes.
Deborah Brown.
Aye.
Christina Wong.
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew.
Yes.
Jonathan Maddox. Jonathan.
He's
Oh, I'm
thinking.
sorry.
I'm going to oppose.
Max Viscosi.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on. Assembly Bill 2968. Roseanne?
Okay. So AB 2968 is a bill that's sponsored by the Board of Psychology, and it has to do with the requirement in law that the Department of Consumer Affairs create a brochure to educate the public about the prohibition of sexual contact in therapy. So currently, the law requires DCA to prepare an informational brochure for victims of psychotherapist, patient sexual contact, and their advocates. It requires the brochure to be provided to everyone contacting the medical board, affiliated health boards, or the Board of Behavioral Sciences regarding a complaint involving psychotherapist-patient sexual relations. In addition, any psychotherapist or their employer who become aware through a patient that the patient had alleged sexual intercourse or contact with a previous psychotherapist must provide and discuss the brochure with them. And then it provides a specific definition of sexual contact as touching of an intimate part of another person. So this bill is seeking to bring the language in the brochure and the statutory language requiring it up to date with current times. There's a little bit of outdated language in there, and so they're focusing on kind of trying to make it a little bit more modern. So the bill removes the requirement that the DCA consult with the Attorney General's office and also the sexual assault program of the Office of Criminal Justice Planning, which no longer exists anymore, in the development of the brochure. It updates the definition of psychotherapist to include LEPs, they previously were not included, and then updates terminology for other board license types, like changing intern to associate. And then the third thing, the major thing it does is it adds a definition of sexual behavior to include with the definition of sexual contact. And sexual behavior in the bill is defined as inappropriate contact or communication of a sexual nature. It does not include the provision of appropriate therapeutic interventions relating to sexual issues. The Board of Psychology is leading this effort in seeking input from BBS and the medical board to modernize the language. There are specific areas of concern is that outdated terminology does not include certain sexual behaviors that have arisen with advances in technology. And so they're seeking to make some changes that you see here. In its April meeting, the Policy and Advocacy Committee recommended the board consider a support position on the bill.
Just as a side note, I'd like to thank Dr. Brew and Jonathan Maddox for their participation, active participation in developing the language. It was really informative and nice collaboration with Board of Psychology and the Medical Board, so thank you.
Any other discussion or questions from the board on this?
I'm happy to move to support.
I want to open it up to.
All right. Good. Well, there's always discussion after.
We can. Okay, so the public, does anyone in the public have something they'd like to say?
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California, we support the bill.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, back to the board. Okay, back to the board. Leah?
I'll make a motion to support.
Okay, motion to support. Is
I'll
there?
second that. Sorry. Whoever, I'll second.
Okay, Christina Wong, second. Any discussion? Okay, call for the vote, please.
Renee Lonner,
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlis-Fox.
Yes.
Dr. Peter Chu,
Aye.
Betty Conley,
Yes.
Deborah Brown,
Aye.
Christina Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew,
Yes.
Jonathan Maddox.
Yes.
Max Disposti.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Moving on to Senate Bill 906. Roseanne? Oh, yeah.
Okay, for this bill, I have a handout from the Southern California Counseling Center as well, just talking about their position on peer support specialist certification. If you guys could share copies, I don't have quite enough for everybody, and I need to give some to the audience. So if you could pass it out and then distribute if there's any left for the audience as well, and then pass this out really quick.
I guess that's 3 minutes.
I can't see. Okay. All right, so this particular bill would require the State Department of Healthcare Services, or DHCS, to establish a peer, parent, transition age, and family support specialist certification program, and to include those provisions as a provider type within the Medi-Cal program. So this bill provides a specific definition of peer support specialist services. And then it requires the DHCS to establish a certification program by July 1 of 2019. It requires DHCS to redefine responsibilities and practice guidelines for each type of peer support specialist using best practice materials and to determine curriculum and core competencies. And they have some specific core competencies outlined in the bill that they want them to define. And then it requires DHCS to specify training requirements and CE requirements, establish a code of ethics, determine a certification process and a revocation process, and also clinical supervision requirements. One of the requirements for a licensed, for a supervisor would be a mental health professional defined in 782.35 of the California Code of Regulations. However, a mental health professional defined in that title can also provide supervision, and there is an issue with that, which I'll get to in a second. And so the bill also states that the act does not imply that a certification holder is qualified or authorized to diagnose an illness or provide clinical services. And finally, it allows DHCS to implement this law via plan letters, bulletins, or similar instructions without regulations until regulations are adopted. And regulations must be adopted by July 1, 2021. So there's a couple of year grace period where DHCS can kind of do what it needs to do to implement it. The intent of this bill from the author is they note that peer support programs have emerged as evidence-based practice across the nation, with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and about 40 states having a certification process. However, California is not one of them. And staff surveyed a few states to determine their requirements for peer support specialists, and those are included in the packet here. The board considered a very similar bill to this one in 2015-2016. That was SB 614. It was essentially the same program with a few tweaks. The board had taken a support if amended position on that bill. In that position, it asked for a clear exclusion of psychotherapy services, a better defined scope of practice, and the inclusion of LPCCs as acceptable supervisors. However, SB 614 was ultimately gotten amended to address a different topic. Let's see, in terms of the scope of practice this year, the bill appears to outline a scope of practice for peer support specialists, somewhat indirectly, but it is in two of the sections that provide a definition of peer support specialist services. And then another area of concern, it excludes providing clinical services from work that peer specialists are authorized to do. However, previously we had recommended some more specific language recognizing board license types, and the practice should not include board license type scope of practice. A recent amendment strengthened that somewhat on page 275 of your packet, or page 11 of the bill, lines 21 through 25 in the middle of the page. They've strengthened it to say that the bill does not authorize the delivery of healthcare services in any manner that is not authorized under any provision of the Business and Professions Code. So that adds a little bit more strength there to protecting the board's scope of practice. One other concern, there's a reference to Welfare Institutions Code 140.45.14. It permits licensed mental health professionals, as defined in a section of regulation, to supervise peer support specialists. However, that definition and regulation has been in place since 1997, long before LPCCs were included in our license types, and so therefore LPCCs are not included as acceptable supervisors. They're omitted. So due to this, the board may wish to consider asking the author to list each acceptable license type as a supervisor and include LPCCs. One other thing, the bill does not specify fingerprinting, and there is a little bit of a concern that the requirements are not established in legislation. They're required to be established via regulation, with the department kind of figuring things out until regulation is adopted. At its April meeting, the Policy and Advocacy Committee recommended that the board consider taking a support if amended position and requested 2 amendments. One of the amendments was to include LPCCs as acceptable supervisors. And number 2 was an amendment to clarify the scope of practice of peer support specialists does not include services that fall under the board's license types. And with the subsequent amendment that was made after that meeting, it does a little bit to strengthen that. It's not still the exact language, excuse me, that's listed there, but it does strengthen it in a different way. So that's all. I'll open it for discussion.
Renee?
If I remember correctly, one of our big concerns a couple of years ago, and I still have it, is a lack of fingerprinting. And I think what the response a couple of years ago was, we'll get a lot of positives, as if that were a reason, because these are people in recovery from substance abuse, et cetera. Strikes me getting a lot of hits is not a reason not to do it. That there has to be some advisory oversight board that obviously tells the difference between a recent conviction for a violent crime from something of 10 years ago, but to not have fingerprinting, to me, is a serious problem.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So is it possible for this paraprofessional to be able to function without a licensed mental health professional at that location?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, then, it requires supervisors, but it doesn't say that they have to be at that location.
Okay. Because then I kind of echo the concern that Renee has, along with the fingerprinting. If there's no oversight that someone might be in need of more severe, may need more mental health services beyond, like if somebody's just getting the peer support, not doing other mental health services, and say they have bipolar disorder and are having a break, then those people won't know to be able to refer them out. So I'm just concerned that there's not adequate supervision over these people to make sure that the consumers are safe. And I mean, I guess the recourse would be is this sort of like a board that if the consumer complains that there's a consequence to the person holding the certificate? Is that how that works, that they're going to investigate that?
They're supposed to, DHCS is supposed to come up with ways to, discipline or revoke a certification, but it's not specified in the bill. It would just be specified, they're doing it via regs.
All right, so I love the idea of doing a peer certification, and I think it needs a little more tightening, because they won't know when to refer out to someone if there's a more serious concern. I don't know if the P&A committee talked about that.
Christina, then Jonathan?
So I, working in the MHSA programs and the, drop-in center and with the peers, we call it the coaches, every day, and I can attest to that. They're, I think the limited scope for for them not to do the clinical work, I think it's pretty significant, and for two, the required training is actually a very good component, to not just to help them, acquire the knowledge, but also, be able to, use themselves as a way that, that typical clinical services, counselors would not be able to provide. So, I want to echo what Renee said about the fingerprinting, and I wonder if, because a lot of, instead of require in the legislation, so I'm sure that, a lot of the agency, will have the discretion, whether they want to, fingerprint or not. But I think oftentimes, they would need to go through a pretty vigorous, fingerprint process. And so I, so Leah, your question is about the supervision, right? The revocation, and I like that idea too. That maybe if the DHCS can can have a mechanism, in terms of reporting, some misconduct of the peer support counselor. I think that would be, that would make the bill pretty perfect.
That's one piece, but the other piece was the lack of supervision of the mental health person.
So I think the bill is written that not necessarily that it's the licensees, it's the case manager level or the they are under supervision.
But it could be under a bachelor's level person, possibly.
Yes. Roseanne, you have something?
Well, it says, the language says the DHCS has to determine clinical supervision requirements. So they would have to work under a mental health rehabilitation specialist, which is defined in the California Code of Regulations, or a licensed mental health professional.
Is the definition of mental rehab specialist a master's level degree? It's not like a rehabilitation counselor.
It's a bachelor's level. It's the case manager level, of the yes.
Jonathan?
So,
Anybody else on the board? Anybody from the public have a comment? Okay.
I'm Bob Mendelson with the Southern California Counseling Center here in Los Angeles. We're a nonprofit counseling center and training site. We wrote the statement there, and I just kind of want to go on record that we've been using paraprofessional counselors as volunteer counselors for about 50 years now. And we've worked them into our program along with our pre-licensed people. They take the same trainings, they're in the same supervision groups, they attend the same law and ethics training that our licensure track counselors do. And they provide some, you'll see from the statement, I won't repeat the whole thing, but they provide something really powerful and important in terms of life experience and diversity. When we go to a community like Watts, where we've just established a second counseling center, they are our navigators. They are the people who enable our counselors who aren't familiar with the community to do that work in a respectful, collaborative way, and it's just hugely important. So I'm just, we're not in the Medi-Cal system, but I'm just putting in a vote for those folks, and we're very happy to regularize it in some way, to have a consumer recourse pathway set up. That's great with us. And just a quick note, it's just on and we live scan all of our people. But one note on that, and that is that in the communities we're serving, where there is systemic oppression, where there is systemic racism, the issue of the criminal background becomes politically loaded. It's not a neutral topic. So I just want to say, please do that carefully when you're talking about a criminal background check and what qualifies a person and what doesn't. I think the word recent is very important because some of our most effective paraprofessionals are people who can, say to a 17-year-old, you don't want to go this route. I've been there, and that's just huge. You know, it just really is tremendously important to our work. So just a vote for the role of paraprofessionals in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback on that. That Bob was one of the individuals that we all met early in January. Got a really nice tour of their facility. They met with us extensively and talked about the training of the paraprofessionals and what they go through before they get out in the field, which is really, really, really important. So I walked away feeling very confident, besides being impressed that the services that the individuals are getting from the paraprofessionals are very valuable and meaningful, and that no one is really crossing borders down there just because of the way they have that structured. And I think it seemed to me that most of those agencies set up in a similar fashion are that cautious as well.
And so,
far,
well, that's part of the wellness and recovery model, that, you know, the paraprofessional are just a very powerful tool, you know, to help out. So I would love to make a motion. Betty, you have a comment?
I've got a kind of a puzzled question-y kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to articulate it succinctly. So it seems to me like the only way that people, okay, so I support the concept 100%, got it. But it seems to me like people are going to choose to do this or not. And there's no teeth in anything that we're doing or in this, nor will there be, nor could there be, because most of those people are in exempt settings, to require people who don't want to participate in this program, don't want to access Medi-Cal funds, and have their own peer tutoring, peer mentoring. They're going to keep doing what they do, right? So this is only going to apply to people who are willing to go through the kind of rigorous training that Bob was just describing, and perhaps that your agency doesn't access Medi-Cal funds, but the whole gist of this is so that those folks can actually access the Medi-Cal funding. Isn't that pretty much the gist of it? So it's going to only apply to people who choose to buy in. So it's got pretty, I mean, I don't know, I don't see a downside to it. I guess that's the long side.
It's sort of a start. They're starting with this, and if you want to be able to work in that arena, the Medi-Cal arena, then you need to meet these standards, and then you can.
So is that saying that these people who get the certification are able to, they would be able to, in some format down the road, be able to bill Medi-Cal?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess the only thing I'm sort of thinking is sort of just logically a couple stages down the road. I echo what the gentleman there shared. Where I work, the peer navigators, the people with lived experience provide a tremendous non-Medi-Cal billable service that many of us licensed clinicians and educated staff cannot provide, because they have walked the path, they have lived the life, they have sort of accessed the resources that has allowed them to ascend to where they are, and they are able to pull people up behind them. My only concern would be somewhere down the road that just due to lack of funding in communities, that people begin to prioritize this position over someone who has lived experience but is not able to bill Medi-Cal, and then they're systematically forced out of the profession because everybody's focused on, well, these people here can actually generate billing and that supports our program, and so we're only going to hire them. And I think it puts the other staff who are equally as valuable at a disservice. So I think that's just a consideration that, and unintended consequences that people who are very valuable to systems get pushed out because they can't bill Medi-Cal.
Okay, I know Christina you had a comment you want to make. Are you done?
I'm good.
Okay. Leah, and then we've got someone from the public.
Just a quick question. As I think about the fingerprinting, I don't think I want us to decide what fingerprint is safe and not safe. I think that just whoever, because it's Medi-Cal billing, they should know, and they get to make the decision if somebody's safe or not safe. Right? I think of like pedophilia or something, maybe not safe, depending on the circumstances. So I would like to add that, and then they can do with it just so that they have the knowledge.
Okay. Would you like to speak?
I'm Olivia from Olivia Lowy and Associates, or AMFT. Just to reinforce what you're saying. This is also an issue of access to care, and there are committees at the state level dealing with the workforce provider shortage crisis. And I think peer counselors and peer certification is on the way in at some point, one way or another. So this allows us to be able to thoughtfully insert this kind of a provider and this kind of credentialing within the scope. There are also payment reform measures that are being discussed so that there may be ways to be able to bill for these providers within a larger integrated system of care.
Thank you.
I just have a quick comment also, in terms of what, the building service. So right now, these peer counselors, peer professionals, they don't, because they're not required to do any billing / record keeping. So actually, we're doing the client a very big disservice because, it's very disjointed because, when they receive services through different providers and you can only hear, from those medical biller without, those peer support counselors. So it's actually make the record keeping, the health record a little bit more complete, and also with the coordination of services become, a more improved. So that's actually a plus side of it.
Anyone else?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, Christina's made a motion.
Do we add that amendment for the, to accept, to support the bill? And do we need to?
Are we amending it?
Amending it for the fingerprinting?
So the finger, sounds like we want the fingerprinting. Do you want the inclusion of LPCCs as supervisors?
Yes.
And then it's, in terms of the scope of practice, you can look at the language on page 11 of the bill.
275. Yeah, it's
Page
more straight.
275
Right.
is the packet page number. If you think that's sufficient, I think that covers it a little more succinctly than we did. It's a little less specific, but I think the same point gets across. So it's kind of up to you if you want to ask him to amend it more specifically or not. I think that it's
I like
covered.
the language. I think it
You
covers
like
it.
it? Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So, I mean, when we talk about Medi-Cal billing, and I guess I'm wondering, would we be asking this this group of certified professionals to do the whole assessment, determine clinical formulations, and do that piece, or would they just be doing progress notes that actually document the work that they're doing with the client, and they may actually work in conjunction with the clinician's case? Is that what we're talking about?
I think they're under supervision.
Yeah, they have to be under
but
supervision.
then they cannot do the clinical services as prescribed.
And there's a list kind of on page, it's kind of on page 272 of what kind of some of their roles would be at the bottom of the page. Some of the core competencies that they would need to have: conflict resolution, group facilitation skills, trauma-informed care, cultural competence. So kind of some of those sort of tasks.
It's very skill building, rehabilitation skill wise.
Sure.
But not really clinical.
So I'll second. This is Leah.
I need clarification on the motion. Is this a support if amended?
Correct.
Yes, that was my
Support
understanding.
is
And the
amended.
amendments include fingerprint requirement and adding LPCCs.
Thank you. Here's the vote. Renee Launer,
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach,
Yes.
Dr. Peter Chu,
Aye.
Betty Conley,
Yes.
Deborah Brown, Christina Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew,
Yes.
Jonathan Maddox,
Yes.
Max Disposti.
Yes.
Motion carries.